Racist cop slaps black woman, then learns. She's the head of Internal Affairs Officer Darren McNeil was not the kind of cop you wanted to run into if you were black in the city of Crestwood Heights. He wore his badge like a shield of superiority, letting prejudice seep into every word he spoke. One sweltering summer afternoon, his simmering racism boiled over when he slapped a woman he believed was powerless. Little did he know she was Alicia Johnson, head of Internal Affairs and the very person with the authority to dismantle his entire career. This is a story of unraveling secrets, high-stakes showdowns, and a justice that arrives like thunder when karma finally knocks at the door. The city of Crestwood Heights lay under a scorching sun that made the asphalt shimmer as though it were covered in molten glass. A typical afternoon traffic jam clogged Jefferson Avenue, with horns blaring and tempers flaring. Among the sea of vehicles was a black and white cruiser from the Crestwood Heights Police Department, rolling slowly past the row of stalled cars. Officer Darren McNeil was at the wheel, his window rolled down to let in any stray breeze he could catch, even though his vehicle's air conditioning was fully functional. Perhaps he wanted to be in the midst of the city's tension, to feel its pulse directly on his skin. Darren thrived on friction. He saw himself as someone who maintained order by breaking the will of those he believed did not deserve to share his streets. At 37 years old, Darren had served on the force for over a decade. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a demeanor that could be imposing or comforting depending on who was looking. If you were a friend, or more importantly, if you looked like him, you might see a good old boy smile under that trimmed moustache. If you didn't, you'd catch the steely gaze that seemed to size you up like a threat. Where others saw diversity, Darren saw outsiders. Where others wanted to understand, Darren preferred to subdue. He had a record of borderline harassment complaints in his file, but he'd always managed to skate around consequences with the help of some conveniently missing dashcam footage or the unwavering loyalty of his partner, Officer Russ Davidson. On that blindingly bright afternoon, with hot air rolling in through the cruiser's window, Darren felt restless. He hated being stuck in traffic. He scanned the sidewalk for anything suspicious or out of place, though he was also itching to spot a scenario that could validate his prejudices. One block down, he spotted a slender black woman in a crisp navy blue pantsuit step out of a Starbucks. Here was the real name of something, a place any viewer would recognize, holding a to-go cup and checking her phone. Her posture was poised, her face partially concealed behind designer sunglasses. She was heading toward a dark sedan parked just ahead of the coffee shop. Something about her confident stride made Darren's hackles rise. "Look at her," he muttered, narrowing his eyes. "Bet she's got some fancy corporate job she thinks makes her untouchable." Next to him, Russ shrugged. "Could be," he replied non-committally. Russ was never the type to overthink a situation. He only wanted to stay out of trouble and keep the peace with Darren. "Let's not make a thing out of nothing, yeah?" Darren ignored his partner's attempt to diffuse his prejudice. He pulled the cruiser to the curb and stepped out, resting a hand on his hip close to his holstered weapon. The sun glared off the mirrored lens of his aviator sunglasses, giving him a menacing look. He pretended to examine a meter on the sidewalk, creating a flimsy pretext to linger. Meanwhile, the black woman, Alicia Johnson, stood by the trunk of her car, setting her coffee on the roof while she dialed a number on her phone. She didn't immediately notice Darren, which somehow irritated him. He wanted her aware of his presence. He wanted her to feel singled out and scrutinized for reasons he couldn't fully articulate even to himself. "Ma'am," Darren called out, voice clipped. "You planning to leave your vehicle here? That meter's expired." Alicia turned, a hint of surprise flickering across her face before she gave a polite smile. "Yes, officer. I just stepped out for a quick pick-me-up. I'm actually heading out now." Darren crossed his arms over his chest. The tension in his posture was unmistakable. "You're not from around here, are you?" Alicia raised an eyebrow, her expression measured. "Does it matter where I'm from? I believe that meter's public property, accessible to anyone who pays for the spot." Darren's jaw tightened. Her neutral, courteous tone grated on him. "Where I'm from, it matters. Folks like you think you can just waltz in here, do as you please, and never face the consequences." He was conscious that this was dangerously close to racial harassment, but in his mind the lines blurred. He saw her polished demeanor and heard an arrogance that he believed only he was entitled to. Alicia's lips parted slightly in surprise, then thinned. "Excuse me?" she asked, her tone a pitch lower, calmer. This was not the first time she had encountered a police officer with such an attitude. She had dealt with them before in official capacities, but this felt different, more personal. The cars on Jefferson Avenue inched forward, their rumbling engines an irritated chorus. A few passers-by slowed, curious about the unfolding confrontation. Darren held his ground, ignoring his partner's uneasy glance from inside the cruiser. "Let me see your ID," Darren demanded, voice laced with condescension. "I want to check if there are any outstanding warrants on you." Alicia's hand hovered near her breast pocket. She had an ID, all right, an official one, but revealing that she was the head of internal affairs for the Crestwood Heights Police Department wasn't something she planned to do in this heated moment. She had her reasons for staying incognito that day. Besides, she wanted to see how far this officer would go. She decided to push back subtly. "Are you requesting my ID on probable cause, officer? Because I haven't done anything wrong. This is a legal parking space. I was about to leave." Darren didn't back down. "Don't question my authority," he spat. "Probable cause is that you're acting suspicious, hanging around, and that tone you used, that's enough reason to see some ID." Alicia's eyebrows rose again, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Hanging around. I literally walked out of Starbucks and got into my car. That's hardly suspicious." "Stop talking back," Darren barked, stepping closer. His hand rose in a threatening motion, and for a moment Alicia wondered if he was about to grab her. Instead, he merely hovered there, close to her face, brandishing his authority like a weapon. Across the sidewalk, Officer Russ Davidson, who had been Darren's partner for 3 years, exited the cruiser. He knew Darren's tendencies, but had never witnessed him go this far in broad daylight. Russ cleared his throat nervously. "Hey, Darren, maybe we should dial it down. This is a simple parking issue." Darren shot Russ a look that said, "Stay out of this." But Russ couldn't help pressing on. "Let's just give her a verbal warning and move on." Russ never thought of himself as a hero. He had grown comfortable turning a blind eye to Darren's microaggressions. But now the tension felt dangerously close to snapping, and he didn't want to be a witness or an accessory to something that would land them both in hot water. Alicia noticed Russ's anxious demeanor, but her focus remained on Darren. She slowly took out her driver's license from her wallet, deciding it was safer to comply for the moment. "Here you go, officer." Darren snatched the license from her hand, his eyes scanning the name, Alicia Johnson. Nothing remarkable about it. He glanced at the address, which was local to Crestwood Heights, so she did live here. He hated being proven wrong in any way. "You sure you live here?" he prodded, peering over the license at her. "Seems like an expensive area. Hard to believe on your type of salary." The remark made Alicia bristle. She couldn't let that slide. "Officer, that's enough. Your insinuations are unprofessional. I'm requesting your badge number." Darren's face flushed with anger. His hand twitched, as if on a hair trigger. Before he could check himself, he lashed out. The slap resounded through the air, striking Alicia across the face, sending her sunglasses tumbling to the ground. Passers-by gasped. A hush seemed to drape over that stretch of sidewalk, shock and disbelief settling in. Alicia stumbled back, hand flying to her cheek, eyes wide in both pain and outrage. She tasted iron in her mouth, where her lip had grazed her teeth. In that moment, the unstoppable tide of her righteous anger surged forward. She wanted to retaliate, but she forced herself to think strategically. She locked eye after the blow officer Russ Davidson stood rooted to the spot. He had never seen Darren openly assault someone like that without the slightest provocation. People were taking out their phones, pointing cameras at the scene. Darren, realizing what he'd done, quickly stepped back, a flicker of horror momentarily crossing his face. Then, in a split second, he tried to regain his composure, forging a smug expression as if to say, "You deserved it." Alicia bent down, retrieved her fallen sunglasses, and saw they had cracked along the frame. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding like a drumbeat. She glanced at the people filming and then at Darren. With painstaking control, she spoke. "You've just made a grave mistake, officer." Darren sneered. "Yeah? And what are you going to do about it?" Alicia decided not to reveal her position then and there. It was safer and far more effective to let him squirm under the weight of his impending consequences. She picked up her phone, speed-dialed a number, and said quietly, "Chief, this is Alicia. I need you to send a squad car immediately to Jefferson Avenue outside the Starbucks. I've been assaulted by an officer." Then she hung up, without further explanation. Darren let out a disbelieving laugh. "Chief, huh? Let me guess. Your cousin or something?" Russ looked at Alicia with growing apprehension. Why does she have the chief's direct line, he wondered. Something's not right. In the tense minutes that followed, Russ tried to contain the situation. He stepped between Alicia and Darren, acting as a mediator. "Ma'am," he stuttered, "please calm down. We can figure this out." Alicia replied icily, "I'm calm, but I won't let this slide. You've both done enough damage." The mention of both stung Russ because he prided himself on not being like Darren. But he had never truly acted to stop Darren's behavior either. He had allowed the smaller moments of prejudice to compound into this monstrous act of outright assault. Guilt churned in his stomach. Less than 10 minutes later, a black unmarked SUV pulled up to the curb, followed by a patrol car. Out of the SUV stepped Deputy Chief Lionel Martinez, a tall, stern-faced man with salt and pepper hair. He scanned the scene, noticing the cluster of bystanders, the phone cameras, and Alicia holding a cracked pair of sunglasses. 2 uniformed officers from the patrol car followed, their expressions perplexed. Deputy Chief Martinez approached Alicia immediately, concern etched on his features. "Are you all right, Miss Johnson?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Darren watched with a growing sense of dread. Miss Johnson? And why was the deputy chief treating her like someone with authority? Alicia gave Darren a piercing look, then turned back to Martinez. "I'm okay, physically, but I want Officer McNeil placed on immediate administrative leave, pending an investigation into assault and abuse of power. There are multiple witnesses. I'm sure the camera phones around us captured everything too." Darren's eyes widened. The color drained from his face. "Pending investigation? Who the hell are you to order that?" he demanded. Deputy Chief Martinez fixed Darren with a glare that could freeze molten steel. "Show some respect, Mrs. Johnson isn't just a citizen. She's with Internal Affairs. You'd do well to remember that." Officer Russ took a half-step backward, his heart hammering against his ribcage. Internal Affairs. This woman outranked all of them in terms of oversight power. Realizing the enormity of the situation, Russ silently cursed himself for not stepping in sooner. Darren's mind spun as he tried to maintain control. This was unprecedented for him. He had always operated with relative impunity, confident that his buddy in the union or some department bureaucrat would paper over any excesses. But now he was face to face with the woman who had the power to ruin him. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, searching for a defense. "Internal Affairs," he managed to croak, lips dry. "What are you doing out here in plain clothes?" Alicia gave him a tight-lipped smile. "I'm the head of Internal Affairs. As for my outfit, I was working in a plainclothes capacity today. I didn't expect to be assaulted by one of our own." The phones kept rolling. A small crowd had gathered, whispering among themselves. Some recognized Alicia's name, as it was occasionally mentioned in local newspaper articles about police accountability. Others simply sensed that justice was about to unfold in real time. Deputy Chief Martinez signaled to the 2 uniformed officers, "Secure the scene." "Clear the crowd," he instructed firmly, maintaining an air of authority that commanded obedience. Then, lowering his voice so only Alicia, Darren and Russ could hear, he said, "Let's talk, right now." Alicia nodded, still rubbing the tender spot on her cheek. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was starting to wear off, leaving anger and a looming headache in its place. But she kept her composure. This was far from over. The group retreated into the tinted interior of the deputy chief's SUV. The air conditioning blasted a welcome coolness, a sharp contrast to the sweltering tension outside. Darren sat in the back seat next to Russ, while Alicia sat up front, next to Martinez. "Officer McNeil, you have just committed a serious offense," Martinez said, turning slightly to address Darren. "Striking a civilian, especially unprovoked, could lead to assault charges. Striking a member of Internal Affairs only compounds the violation." Darren attempted to defend himself. "She was resisting my request to see ID, acting hostile. I had to maintain control." Alicia let out a short, humorless laugh. "Hostile? I politely questioned the legality of your demand, and you decided to maintain control by slapping me." Russ stared at his lap, as if the floor mats were the most fascinating thing he'd seen all day. He knew Darren's words were a lie, or at best a gross exaggeration. But now, he wondered if Alicia Johnson had been investigating Darren for some time. Maybe she'd been investigating both of them. The dreaded possibility that all those minor complaints might resurface and be laid at his doorstep gnawed at him. Guilt and fear warred within him. Alicia noticed Russ's body language and decided to keep an eye on him. She suspected he had played a role in covering for Darren's past misdeeds, but she also sensed some reluctance in him now. Maybe Russ was ready to come clean. She'd have to find out. Martinez sighed deeply, then said, "Officer McNeil, hand over your badge and your service weapon. Effective immediately, you're on administrative leave, pending an internal affairs investigation." Darren's eyes flashed with outrage. "You can't just—" "Yes, I can." Martinez cut him off. "And Miss Johnson can. She is your superior in this context. You've left us no choice." Darren fumbled with his badge, reluctant to part with it. A symbol of authority that had always shielded him was now being stripped away. With trembling fingers, he unholstered his Glock and handed it to Martinez, who placed it carefully in a lockbox. The sense of finality in that moment was suffocating for Darren. The group exited the SUV. Darren stood on the curb, feeling naked without his badge and weapon. Publicly, he was being disgraced. Some of the bystanders were still there, cell phones in hand, capturing every moment. Darren's blood boiled. He shot Alicia a venomous glare. Under different circumstances, Alicia might have felt sympathy, but after enduring Darren's assault, she felt only resolve. She turned to Deputy Chief Martinez. "I'll handle the official paperwork. Let's escort Officer McNeil back to the precinct, where he can await a formal statement." Darren's mind churned with a potent mix of fear, anger, and an irrational hunger for revenge. He blamed Alicia for everything, refusing to see his own wrongdoing. "She ruined my career," he thought bitterly. "I'll make sure she pays." The Crestwood Heights Police Department precinct was a squat grey building on West Thorn Street. Its bland architecture offered little comfort as they all arrived in separate cars. Darren rode with Russ in their cruiser, though the drive was silent, tension filling the narrow space between them. Alicia and Martinez followed in the SUV, every bump in the road serving as an unwelcome jolt to Alicia's throbbing cheek. Once inside the station's buzzing lobby, Martinez instructed Darren to wait in a private conference room. Meanwhile, Alicia, still in plain clothes, accompanied Martinez to his office on the third floor. The hush that followed them down the hallway was palpable. Word had already spread. An officer had assaulted the head of Internal Affairs. People's eyes widened, some openly gawking as they passed by. Martinez's office was neat and spacious. Certificates adorned the walls, including a notable one from the FBI National Academy at Quantico, a real establishment that many senior officers attend. Alicia nodded, acknowledging the significance of that training. Martinez gestured for her to sit in a chair facing his desk, then took his seat. "Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice respectful yet laced with concern, "I was under the impression you were investigating corruption within the department more quietly. I didn't realize you'd be out in the field alone." Alicia sighed. "I was following a different lead related to some financial misconduct among local officers when I bumped into Officer McNeil. I had no idea I was going to become the victim of his blatant racism and brutality." Unraveling a web of misconduct. Martinez nodded gravely. "I'm aware of multiple minor complaints against McNeil, but each time the cases were deemed inconclusive. He always had an alibi, or the dash cam footage disappeared. We suspected an inside ring helping him. Now it seems we finally have direct evidence." Alicia glanced at the stack of files on Martinez's desk. "I'll compile my statement. Also, I'd like a thorough review of his recorded footage from the last month, if it hasn't mysteriously vanished yet." She paused. "And I want to speak to Officer Davidson. He might crack under pressure. He's been covering for McNeil, but I think he's close to a breaking point." After Martinez escorted Alicia to a separate meeting room, he summoned Russ for an interview. Russ walked in, shoulders slumped, sweat beading at his temple. He wasn't a bad man by nature. He had simply allowed himself to be complicit, lulled by the perceived safety of Darren's power plays. Now that the fortress of Darren's protection was crumbling, Russ felt his world tilting on its axis. Alicia sat across a small wooden table from Russ, flanked by an internal affairs stenographer. Martinez observed quietly from a corner. "Officer Davidson," Alicia began, voice firm but not unkind, "we're investigating the events of this afternoon, as well as previous complaints. I want to give you an opportunity to tell the truth." Russ ran a hand across his face. "Look, I never wanted anything like this to happen. Darren, he's got a temper and, yeah, he says stuff that's out of line. But I swear, I never participated in it. I just never reported it." Alicia tilted her head. "Do you understand the implications of not reporting? People were harmed, intimidated, and in my case, assaulted. We need to know who else helped him cover up any misconduct." Russ swallowed hard. It was mostly just him, but sometimes dispatch would lose footage, or the union rep would hush things up. There were also cases where other officers who sympathized with him would say the suspect resisted or turned aggressive. I never told them to lie, but I didn't stop them either. Alicia nodded, taking notes. She locked eyes with Russ. "Officer Davidson, I can't excuse your silence. However, your cooperation now might help mitigate the consequences you'll face. I need you to testify against McNeil and anyone else involved. Without your testimony, we might not have the leverage to clean up this corruption." Russ clenched and unclenched his fists, torn between loyalty to the badge and a growing sense of moral responsibility. "I'll do it," he whispered at last. "I'll testify. I'm done protecting him." Martinez stepped forward, placing a hand on Russ's shoulder. "You're doing the right thing," he said, though his expression was somber. He knew that even the right thing could cost an officer dearly in the brotherhood of the force. Meanwhile, Darren sat alone in another conference room, stewing in anger. He was aware that Alicia was likely in the building, laying out the case that would see him stripped of rank, maybe even land him in jail. The adrenaline from earlier was fading, leaving behind a dull terror. But rage still coursed through him, fueling thoughts of retribution. "She humiliated me. Who is she to do that?" After a long wait, a pair of internal affairs investigators finally entered. They took seats opposite Darren, placing a voice recorder on the table. "Officer McNeil, please give us your account of what happened on Jefferson Avenue." Darren gritted his teeth. "She was resisting. I had probable cause. Then she got aggressive, so I had to subdue her." "Subdue her by slapping her across the face?" the investigator asked, one eyebrow arched. "That's not standard procedure." Darren's face twitched. "It's not, but she was out of line." The second investigator leaned in. "We've already reviewed bystander videos. We have no visual or audio evidence that Ms. Johnson acted hostile or aggressive toward you. Could you please clarify?" Darren felt cornered. He glanced at the clock on the wall, ticking mercilessly, reminding him that time was not on his side. "That footage is incomplete," he barked. "You can't see everything that happened." The investigator calmly reached into a file folder and produced several still images taken from at least 4 different camera angles. Each clearly showed Alicia standing calmly, then Darren's hand striking her. "There's no sign of aggression from Mrs. Johnson in any of these. Care to explain?" Realizing he was trapped, Darren decided to lash out with a different tactic. Smear Alicia's name. "She might be the head of internal affairs, but maybe she's not clean either. You think she's a saint? I've heard rumors about her taking bribes to bury certain cases." The investigators exchanged knowing looks. This was a common deflection tactic. "We've been working with Ms. Johnson for years. There's no evidence to support your claim," one responded. "And even if you had evidence, which you do not, it does not justify assaulting her." Darren deflated. He had played his last card. The investigators pressed on, systematically dismantling his excuses. Within hours, the investigation escalated. Darren found himself relieved of duty, potentially facing criminal charges for assault and battery. The district attorney's office was notified, and local media outlets, always hungry for scandal, got wind of the story. They loved nothing more than a narrative featuring police brutality and internal corruption. Headlines flashed: "Racist cop suspended after slapping internal affairs chief." Darren managed to post bail after being processed for the assault charge, and he returned to his suburban home where his wife Mandy waited with anxious desperation. Mandy was a kindergarten teacher, mild-mannered and entirely unprepared to deal with the fiasco that had just turned their lives upside down. Stepping inside his house, Darren threw his keys onto the kitchen counter, letting out a frustrated roar. Mandy looked up from her seat at the dining table, eyes brimming with worry. "I saw the news." "Darren, what have you done?" He paced back and forth, red-faced. "She's out to get me. She's some big shot in IA, and she's twisting the story." Mandy felt anger and confusion swirl within her. "Everyone I know who watched the video said it was clear as day. You slapped her. How could you do that?" Darren glowered, refusing to accept blame. "I did what I had to do. She disrespected me." Mandy stood up, trembling with agitation. "Disrespected you? That's your excuse for hitting a woman in public?" She pressed her hands to her temples. "My God, how are we supposed to face the neighbors, the parents of my students, everyone at church?" Darren sneered. "They'll believe what they want. My job, my livelihood. It's all on the line. I need your support." Mandy's eyes welled up. "I'm not sure I can keep supporting you if you can't even admit you were wrong." The heaviness in the room was suffocating. Darren stormed out to the backyard, leaving Mandy alone in the kitchen, her tears quietly staining the evening silence. Meanwhile, Alicia returned to her own apartment, a high-rise overlooking the busy downtown district of Crestwood Heights. She sat on her balcony, letting the night breeze cool her bruised cheek. In her hand was a glass of water she sipped absently, her mind replaying the events of the day. She knew Darren would try to spin this. She had a tough road ahead to see justice served, especially in a system that often protected men like him. She also felt a pang of sorrow for how this would reflect on the department as a whole. While she believed in accountability, she worried the story would erode public trust in the good officers who put their lives on the line daily. That weighed on her conscience. But the necessity of exposing corruption outweighed any concerns of bad publicity. Better a painful truth than a comforting lie. Over the next week, protests erupted in front of the Crestwood Heights Police Department. Activists, community leaders, and ordinary citizens carried signs demanding justice. Some signs read, "Stop racist police brutality," while others bore Alicia's name, praising her courage. The tension that Darren once thrived upon now threatened to consume him. Inside the department, morale was torn. Some officers felt betrayed by Alicia for bringing a scandal to light. Others quietly supported her, grateful that someone had the fortitude to stand up to misconduct. Officer Russ Davidson found himself caught in the crossfire. After volunteering to testify, he was ostracized by a handful of colleagues who viewed him as a traitor. Building the case. Alicia and her internal affairs team worked tirelessly to consolidate the evidence against Darren. They pulled body cam footage, radio transcripts, and logged complaints from citizens over the past few years. To their relief, they discovered that not all the video evidence had been erased. Some of it was merely mislabeled or filed away. Coupled with Russ's sworn testimony, a damning pattern of behavior emerged: racial profiling, excessive use of force, intimidation, and falsified reports. "This isn't just one bad officer," Alicia told Martinez, handing him a thick file of evidence. "This is an entire culture that enabled him." Martinez nodded. "We'll clean house, starting with him." News of the impending case against Darren spread. The media clamored for details, and talk radio shows debated whether Darren was just a tough cop doing his job or a bigot in uniform. The department's public information officer tried to remain neutral, but the general consensus outside certain far-right circles was that Darren had gone too far. Meanwhile, Darren's personal life deteriorated. Creditors began calling as his sudden suspension jeopardized his income. Worse, Mandy moved out temporarily, staying with her sister. She left a note on the kitchen counter that read, "I can't watch you destroy yourself and everything around you. I need time." Desperate and unstable, Darren turned to an unsavory contact, one of the shady figures he'd shaken down in the past. A local thug named Leo Banks Jefferson, who often sold illicit goods to corrupt officers in exchange for protection. Darren had never stooped to that level before, but his vendetta against Alicia pushed him to extremes. "I need a favor, Banks," Darren said over a burner phone. "Something to put the fear of God into that IA boss. Just to scare her, you know." Banks laughed, the sound devoid of warmth. "You must really be desperate, officer. But sure, for a price." Late one night, Alicia stepped out of her building to walk her dog, an aging golden retriever named Sunny. She had her phone in one hand and a small flashlight in the other. The streets were dimly lit, the usual city sounds echoing off concrete walls. A car idled across the street, headlights off, engine rumbling softly. Suddenly, a dark figure emerged from behind a parked SUV, rushing toward Alicia with menacing speed. The figure wore a hoodie, face concealed by a bandana. Without warning, he swung a metal pipe at her legs. Alicia let out a sharp cry, stumbling, but managed to dodge the brunt of the blow. Sunny barked furiously, lunging at the attacker. Alicia's instincts kicked in. She was physically fit, having trained in self-defense. Though the pipe grazed her side, she retaliated with a swift kick, causing the assailant to stagger. Adrenaline flooded her system as she shouted for help. In the distance, a security guard from a nearby building heard her screams and sprinted toward the commotion. The assailant panicked, dropping the pipe and racing back to the waiting car. It peeled away with a screech of tires. Alicia winced, pressing a hand to her bruised ribs, trembling from the close call. Sunny nuzzled her leg, whimpering. Within minutes, squad cars arrived, lights flashing, sirens wailing. Alicia provided a description of the attacker and the vehicle's partial license plate. The police combed the area and found the discarded pipe. Encouragingly, they discovered a telltale smudge, a partial fingerprint. Alicia had a strong suspicion of who might be behind this. She recalled Darren's vengeful glare. His sense of entitlement turned toxic. However, she had no concrete proof yet, only an uneasy certainty. "Darren's behind this," she murmured to the responding officers. "We have to connect the dots." The attempt on Alicia's life galvanized the police department into action. Deputy Chief Martinez personally assigned a detective, Marisol Chen, to the case. Chen was known for her dogged persistence and ability to read people like an open book. She immediately began digging into phone records, security footage, and any suspicious contacts Darren might have had. Within 48 hours, Chen tracked down a suspicious call made from a disposable phone purchased at a gas station on the outskirts of the city. The call pinged near Darren's home. She also found camera footage from the gas station showing a man in a hoodie matching the attacker's build, accompanied by none other than Leo Banks Jefferson. Armed with this evidence, Chen confronted Darren in the presence of his union rep, Alicia and Martinez. Darren's face turned ashen as Chen laid out the facts: the burner phone records, the partial fingerprint on the pipe that matched one of Banks's known associates, and the ominous timing of the assault. "You have no proof I asked him to do anything," Darren spat, sweating bullets under the interrogation. "He could have acted alone." Chen leveled a cold stare at him. "Why would a random street thug go after Ms. Johnson, the head of IA, leaving behind such a specific signature that ties him back to you?" She flipped open a file, "And we have your text messages with Banks discussing a favor." The final straw, Darren's union rep, a grizzled man named Tom Cafferty, sighed and leaned toward Darren. "We can't save you from this if there's a direct link," he murmured under his breath, but everyone in the room heard him. Alicia, arms folded, watched Darren with a mixture of contempt and a trace of sadness. "Officer McNeil, your arrogance led you here. You assaulted me, and you allegedly tried to intimidate or harm me further to cover your tracks. You've dug your own grave." The district attorney moved swiftly, pressing charges of aggravated assault, conspiracy to commit assault, and evidence tampering against Darren. A separate set of charges awaited Banks and his associates. The media coverage exploded again, painting Darren as the poster child for racist, corrupt policing. City officials, desperate to restore public trust, supported Alicia's thorough house cleaning. "We cannot allow officers who betray the oath to protect and serve to remain in our ranks," the mayor declared at a televised press conference. "We stand by Ms. Johnson and Deputy Chief Martinez in their mission to uphold justice." Darren's court trial began under a storm of controversy. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, demanding swift justice. News vans lined the block, reporters eager for sound bites. Inside, Darren looked exhausted and desperate, shadows under his eyes. The confident posture he once flaunted had melted away, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who knew the walls were closing in. Alicia took the stand, recounting the events in a measured, resolute tone. She described the slap, the subsequent harassment, and the assault attempt. Russ Davidson testified as well, verifying Darren's history of abuse and bigotry. Several former victims of Darren's intimidation also came forward, emboldened by Alicia's stand. After days of testimony, cross-examinations, and emotional witness statements, the jury deliberated. In a verdict that resonated throughout Crestwood Heights, Darren McNeil was found guilty on multiple counts. The judge handed down a sentence of 7 years in state prison, along with a hefty fine and the loss of his law enforcement credentials. Darren's face twisted in disbelief as the cuffs were placed around his wrists in the courtroom. Mandy watched from a distance, tears streaming down her face, unsure of whether she was crying out of sorrow or relief. For Alicia, it was a moment of vindication, but also a somber reminder of how badly the system could fail when people like Darren were allowed to fester within its ranks. While Darren awaited transport to a correctional facility, he spent time in a holding cell, stewing over his downfall. Word traveled fast inside the jail walls. Many of the inmates were people he had once arrested or harassed. Darren found no allies there. He was targeted with menacing glares, a few muttered threats, and scornful laughter. Karma had arrived with a vengeance. In the days that followed, he received no visits from his peers, no letters of solidarity. Mandy remained estranged. His only companionship was the oppressive echo of his own thoughts, and the haunting awareness that his sense of superiority had brought him to this humiliating end. Back at the Crestwood Heights Police Department, Alicia led a series of workshops on ethical policing, community engagement, and bias training. She partnered with local organizations to rebuild bridges. Officer Russ Davidson, after receiving a formal reprimand for failing to report Darren's misconduct, was allowed to stay on the force, under strict probationary conditions. He pledged to be a better cop, mindful that silence in the face of injustice was complicity. The culture began to shift, slowly but noticeably. Younger officers felt empowered to question questionable directives. The black community, though still cautious, expressed tentative hope that the force could change. Alicia took a few weeks off to recover from her bruised ribs and the emotional turmoil of the trial. During this time, she visited her grandmother in a nearby retirement home. Sitting together in a quiet courtyard, they talked about Alicia's late parents, both civil rights attorneys, who had instilled in her the unshakable conviction to fight for justice. Her grandmother patted her hand and said, "I'm proud of you, child. You stood up for what's right, just like your mama and daddy taught you." Alicia smiled through misty eyes. "I only hope I can keep doing it without losing faith in the good officers out there." Her grandmother nodded. Faith isn't just about believing in something perfect. It's about believing it can become better. Several months later, Alicia walked into the bustling precinct. The tension that once clung to the walls had eased, replaced by a cautious optimism. She greeted colleagues who approached her with respect, even gratitude. She still encountered a few resentful glances. Change always had its detractors, but the overwhelming sentiment was that the cleansing process had been necessary. In a renovated training room, Alicia began another workshop. A group of cadets watched her with rapt attention as she spoke about constitutional policing, empathy, and accountability. Some of these cadets had grown up in neighborhoods where trust in law enforcement was scarce. They listened with hope that a new generation of officers would take a different path, a path guided by integrity, not prejudice. Officer Russ Davidson, having completed his probationary period, signed up to mentor at-risk youth in collaboration with a non-profit. He found solace in helping teenagers realize that a police officer could be a source of guidance rather than intimidation. It was his way of atonement. As for Darren, he spent his prison term grappling with the hard truth. The power he once abused had not only abandoned him, but had turned into a curse. He had effectively exiled himself from the life he knew. Any illusions of superiority vanished in the daily grind of prison life. The bitterness never fully left him, but over time, even bitterness can dull into regret. Alicia continued to serve as the head of internal affairs, though the job never got easier. New challenges arose. Policing is a human institution, prone to flaws. Yet each time she encountered resistance or a fresh scandal, she remembered the day she stood her ground on Jefferson Avenue, refusing to let prejudice and brutality prevail. Crestwood Heights was far from perfect, but Alicia's unwavering stance drew a line in the sand, a line that said, "Cross this, and justice will find you." And justice did find Darren McNeil in the most dramatic, karmic way possible, a reminder that no badge, no hidden alliances, no amount of intimidation could shield a man who chose to use his authority as a weapon of hate. Thank you for watching this story unfold, a riveting drama of power, prejudice, and ultimate redemption. If you found yourself on the edge of your seat as Officer McNeil's world crumbled and cheered for Alicia's uncompromising fight for justice, we've done our job in reminding everyone that doing what's right can come at a cost, but it's always worth it in the end. This story may be fictional, but its lessons are all too real. Racism and abuse of power have consequences, and true justice prevails when those brave enough to stand up refuse to be silenced. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more stories just like this, ones that spark conversation and shed light on the issues that matter, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment below about what you think the next storyline should be. Thank you again for your support, and see you next time. White cop mocks black woman for no reason. Seconds later, the DEA arrives to arrest him. Something unexpected was brewing behind the thick heat of a summer afternoon in Philadelphia. Officer Jack Monroe had no idea that a routine patrol, one that gave him ample opportunity to spout his hateful words, would mark the beginning of his own downfall. Across the street, Tasha Brown, a determined black woman with a kind heart and a history of standing up for what's right, became the target of the officer's sneering remarks. Onlookers froze in shock as he unleashed an ugly barrage, mocking her. Little did he know, a far bigger storm was about to roll in, one that would bring the DEA straight to his doorstep. Philadelphia in mid-July can be sweltering, with humidity that clings to the skin. Heat radiates off the asphalt like waves in the desert. On the corner of Broad Street, across from the well-known Temple University campus, street vendors hawked water bottles, and the air felt thick with tension. The city had always been a melting pot of cultures, a historical epicenter of American independence, but behind the city's proud monuments and bustling neighborhoods lay daily stories of injustice, fleeting and potent as a match strike. Among the daily bustle stood Tasha Brown, a 29-year-old woman as resolute as the Philadelphia skyline. Tasha's skin gleamed with a fine sheen of sweat as she waited for her bus. She carried a worn leather briefcase that bore the subtle scratches of life's battles, and inside it were carefully prepared documents for a community outreach program she volunteered for. Since her teenage years, Tasha had believed wholeheartedly in community solidarity and systematic change. Her father had marched with local activists in the 1990s, and she had inherited his pride, a pride that refused to be crushed by the system. On the adjacent corner, Officer Jack Monroe was parked in his squad car under the shade of a half-blooming elm tree. He was a man of medium build, broad-chested, with a permanent scowl etched into his features. His baseball cap bore the official patch of the Philadelphia Police Department. He was known around the precinct as someone who seldom wore a smile unless he was mocking or ridiculing someone else. Officer Monroe thrived on intimidation. Few people dared challenge him because he had a knack for turning every situation in his favor. That day, sweat beaded on Monroe's brow as well, and his uniform clung to his skin. He fidgeted inside the cruiser, flipping channels on the police radio, bored and restless. He was there to monitor traffic and cite anyone driving recklessly around Temple University, but it wasn't long before his attention shifted elsewhere. A bright, persistent ringtone drew his eyes to Tasha, who had just finished a phone call with the coordinator of her outreach program. From the scornful curl of his lip, it was clear that something in Tasha's presence was bothering him. Monroe's partner for the day, Officer Brian Marsh, a man of fewer words and, some said, fewer scruples, glanced at his colleague's tense posture. Marsh knew Monroe had a short fuse. He also knew Tasha by sight. She was active in local causes and had once called out the police department for questionable stops in her community. "She's always stirring up trouble," Monroe muttered. "Look at her, all high and mighty." Marsh shrugged, saying nothing. He had learned early on that challenging Monroe often ended badly. Besides, Marsh's ambitions lay elsewhere. He'd apply for a specialized unit and get away from Monroe as soon as he could. He planned to keep his head down and avoid drama, if that was even possible around his hot-headed partner. As Tasha's bus arrived, she walked forward, stepping off the curb to get in line. The bus's hydraulic hiss sounded. Suddenly, a passing SUV swerved to avoid a jaywalker, hopped onto the curb, then back onto the street. Tasha jumped away from the incoming vehicle and stumbled a step, right in Monroe's line of sight. He saw Tasha moving abruptly, misread her actions, and stepped out of the cruiser, shouting, "Hey, what do you think you're doing? Stand still!" Monroe's voice rang out, making heads turn. Tasha glanced over at him, momentarily puzzled. "I'm sorry, officer. The car nearly—" "I didn't ask for excuses," Monroe barked. "You people always have some story, don't you?" The phrase "you people" bristled against Tasha's ears like a hornet's sting. She mustered a calm voice. "Sir, I was almost hit by that car. Monroe took a step forward, his heavy boots thudding on the pavement. "Don't talk back to me. Another loudmouth who thinks the rules don't apply to her. Typical." Tasha swallowed. Onlookers stood by, uncertain whether to intervene. The oppressive heat did nothing to calm the tension. The bus driver watched from the vehicle, door open, scanning the scene. Tasha looked Officer Monroe in the eye, determined not to show fear or indignation. "Officer, you're misunderstanding." "Save it," Monroe hissed. "I've heard enough. Just keep your distance from my streets, lady." My streets. Tasha felt her stomach churn. This was not the first time she had encountered this sort of blatant, casual racism, but she refused to let it pass. She took a moment, inhaled, forcing composure. "I'm a Philadelphia native, and it's as much my city as it is anyone's." Monroe scoffed. "Sure it is. Next time, watch where you're going. I don't have the patience for any nonsense." Then, in a voice dripping with malice, Monroe mocked her, imitating her tone. It wasn't just an offhand remark. It was a cruel caricature meant to belittle. At that moment, Tasha felt anger sear through her chest. She clenched her fists, inhaled once more, urging herself to remain steady. While Tasha had every right to yell back, she knew confrontation might escalate into something even worse, something she could not afford. Yet in that moment of tension, neither Officer Monroe nor Tasha noticed a black SUV idling further up the street, windows tinted, occupant carefully observing. Even Marsh seemed focused on the exchange, oblivious to who might be watching. The occupant in that SUV was silent, his face stoic. He had larger concerns than a heated sidewalk encounter, namely a rumored ring of corrupt officials that had been funneling drugs and money through the city. And though no one knew it yet, Jack Monroe's name was about to come up at the top of that case. After Officer Monroe finally let Tasha go with a warning she didn't deserve, she boarded the bus, her cheeks hot with humiliation and fury. She found a seat near the back, ignoring curious stares from passengers who had witnessed the exchange. She wanted to scream, to cry, to do something that could release the knot of anger in her chest. But she knew better. She had her own method of handling injustice. She would contact her local council member, share her experience, and lodge a formal complaint. As the bus rolled away, Tasha stared through the window, still gripping her phone. She opened a new note in her device, her mind racing with details of the incident. She described Monroe, his badge number, his partner's vague features, and everything that had been said. She wrote down the date, time, and exact location. Tasha believed in thorough documentation. Her father had always told her that facts and details could be powerful weapons against wrongdoing. Across the city, Officer Monroe's day continued. He swaggered back to his squad car, a self-satisfied grin tugging at his lips. "Ready to roll?" he asked Marsh. Without waiting for a response, he revved the engine, pulling away from the curb. The encounter with Tasha seemed to rejuvenate him in some sick way. He liked showing he was in control. But behind Monroe's bravado lurked a deeper secret, one that had started innocently enough, but had become a snare tightening around him. 2 years earlier, Monroe's mother had fallen ill. The hospital bills, coupled with her long-term care facility costs, weighed on him. The salary of a police officer was decent, but not enough to cover all her needs, plus his own living expenses. Under the strain of looming debt, Monroe had found a friend in a local narcotics ring that offered a side income for turning a blind eye to certain transactions or occasionally providing tips about police activity. What began as small hush money soon became a monthly flow of cash that dwarfed his official paycheck. He rationalized it at first, telling himself it was just to settle debts and support his mother. But once the money started coming, it was difficult to let go. Now, as Monroe drove through familiar neighborhoods, passing by boarded-up row homes and corner bodegas, he glanced at Marsh. The younger officer fiddled with the radio, not meeting Monroe's eyes. Monroe's guilt sometimes manifested as bursts of frustration and rage. He had become particularly nasty toward anyone who reminded him of vulnerability or accountability, people like Tasha Brown, who had that indomitable spirit. They cruised past a local diner named Silvana's, a popular community spot with no-frills breakfast and lunch. Monroe pulled into the lot, planning to grab a quick meal. Inside Silvana's, the air conditioning was a welcome relief. The smell of bacon grease, coffee and syrup hung in the air. Monroe and Marsh sat at the counter, removing their hats. The waitress, a woman in her early 50s with a warm smile, greeted them. "Hot day out there," she said, pouring coffee into their mugs. "Anything special for you boys today?" Monroe sneered. "Just the usual, eggs over easy, bacon, and keep the coffee coming." Marsh ordered the same. As the waitress walked away, Marsh fiddled with a napkin, searching for something to say that might diffuse the tension. "You think that lady earlier will file a complaint?" Monroe shrugged, a derisive chuckle escaping his lips. "Probably. I'm not worried. Nothing will stick. They rarely do." That was the chilling truth of it. In many internal affairs investigations, especially lacking clear video evidence, the result was often a slap on the wrist, if that. Monroe had done this before and come out unscathed. He had mentors in the department who turned a blind eye to his antics, but this time was different. A bigger net was being cast by the DEA in collaboration with the Department of Justice, investigating a citywide corruption ring, and certain names had already surfaced in preliminary intel. A couple of tables down, two men sat quietly finishing their pancakes. One was broad-shouldered with a black windbreaker slung over the back of his chair, out of place for summer in Philadelphia. Despite the heat, it bore an emblem, DEA in bold yellow letters. Monroe paid them no attention. It was not uncommon to see different law enforcement agencies around the city. He had no clue that he himself was already on someone's radar. Later that evening, Tasha sat at her dining room table in her modest one-bedroom apartment. She had the complaint form opened on her laptop, a half-eaten takeout container of pad thai at her side. The overhead fan circled lazily, pushing around the muggy air. She typed in the details: date, time, badge number, location, and the racial slurs and mocking she had endured. She also included names of potential witnesses. The memory of Monroe's cruel voice lingered, still fresh. She felt a surge of anger, but also a spark of purpose. This was how she fought back, through formal channels, through activism, through the unwavering resilience her parents taught her. After hitting submit, Tasha leaned back, feeling both exhausted and relieved. She texted a friend, Janelle, who was a local organizer. "Tasha, just filed a complaint against an officer named Monroe. He went too far today, no more letting it slide. Janelle, proud of you, sis. Let me know if you need me to rally folks or bring attention to it. We stand with you." They chatted a bit more, discussing upcoming events and local protests. Tasha eventually ended the call, took a deep breath, and decided to prepare for bed. The next day would be busy with her outreach program, where she taught job skills to at-risk youth. She believed wholeheartedly in building pathways that saved kids from the streets. The last thing she thought of before sleep claimed her was Monroe's sneer, a reminder that her fight was far from over. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Monroe was also having a restless night. He lived in a small row home in South Philly, an area where houses stood wall to wall, sometimes neglected but still brimming with city life. The red brick facade of his building needed work, and the front steps were cracked. Inside, his living room was sparsely furnished. His mother's hospital bills sat in a neat pile on the coffee table, a grim reminder of his obligations. Monroe slumped onto his old recliner, the leather peeling at the edges. He stared at the TV news, not fully absorbing the headlines. He wondered if Tasha Brown would escalate her complaint. He had a stack of pending disciplinary notes, but he also had a knack for maneuvering around them. Still, an inexplicable dread gnawed at him, as though the comfortable shell he'd built around his misdeeds was about to crack. He changed the channel and saw a report about the Drug Enforcement Administration busting a significant heroin operation in North Philadelphia. The footage showed crates of seized drugs and firearms, with agents wearing bulletproof vests marked DEA. Monroe felt his stomach twist. Over the past few months, the local narcotics ring he was entangled with had grown more brazen, and he'd heard whispers that the feds were stepping up their game. After all, whenever the DEA got involved, it was never a half measure. They came with an iron fist. Monroe tried to reassure himself. They won't connect the dots. They won't know about my involvement. After all, he was just a low-level tipster, occasionally letting certain shipments slip by. He quickly turned off the TV, flicking the room into darkness. The tension in his jaw refused to dissipate, as though some subconscious part of him sensed the walls closing in. The next morning, Tasha headed to the local community center on foot. She enjoyed greeting neighbors and small business owners. This part of Philadelphia, despite its many challenges, felt like home. She spent the morning teaching a workshop on resume building and interview tips to a small group of teenagers. Their faces ranged from hopeful to skeptical, but Tasha had a way of breaking the ice, sharing personal anecdotes. Over the course of 2 hours, she saw the kids begin to blossom with curiosity. When the workshop ended, a young man named Darius lingered. He was tall, thin, dressed in an oversized hoodie despite the heat. He thanked Tasha shyly for the pointers, mentioning he hoped to find a job to help his mom. Tasha smiled and gave him extra materials, urging him to come back next week. These small connections fueled her passion, reminding her why she continued to fight, even if she had to battle with corrupt officers. As Tasha left the community center, she noticed a black SUV parked across the street, its windows tinted. She had an odd feeling that the driver might be watching her, though she couldn't see inside. A flicker of fear ran through her. Ever since she'd become more vocal at city council meetings, Tasha sometimes felt she was under surveillance by the authorities who didn't appreciate her brand of activism. Or maybe it was just her heightened awareness after what Monroe had pulled. She hurried her pace, glancing back occasionally. The SUV didn't move. Unbeknownst to Tasha, inside that SUV was Special Agent Mason Ridley from the DEA. A man of experience in deep-cover operations, Agent Ridley had been working on a citywide drug corruption case for months, maybe even years. He had pictures and files pinned up in his office. Some of those pictures included Officer Jack Monroe. Ridley's sources hinted that Monroe was the weakest link in the chain, a man with a troubled personal situation who had compromised his badge for cash. Ridley also had intelligence that Monroe's anger management issues and racist tendencies weren't just personal failings. They'd made him sloppy. Sloppiness was the DEA's best friend in building a case. Ridley was there to keep an eye on Tasha Brown, not because she was under suspicion, but because she had just filed a complaint against Monroe. Often, official complaints stirred up departmental interest. Ridley wanted to see if her complaint might inadvertently align with the bigger picture they were assembling. He suspected Tasha might become a target for Monroe if the officer felt threatened. Ridley was determined to ensure that any piece of evidence that might implicate Monroe would be preserved, and that Tasha remained safe. 4 days passed. Tasha's complaint wound through the labyrinth of internal affairs. Officer Monroe continued his daily beat, feigning an air of nonchalance. However, the city's rumor mill churned out whispers that the feds were building a case involving corruption at multiple levels. Some in the department were anxious. Others shrugged it off as just another round of allegations. One bright afternoon, Tasha found herself heading to a local bakery to pick up pastries for an upcoming fundraiser. She stepped out of the bakery, balancing boxes in her arms, when she nearly bumped into Officer Monroe. He stood at the corner, ticket pad in hand, scrawling a citation for a car parked too close to a fire hydrant. Tasha froze, heart pounding. She reminded herself to stay composed. She had done nothing wrong. Monroe glanced up, recognition flickering in his eyes. His lip curled into a cruel half-smile. "Well, if it isn't the troublemaker herself," he drawled. Tasha didn't bite. She sidestepped him, determined to keep moving, but Monroe wasn't about to let her pass without a show. He raised his voice. No greeting. Too good for me now, huh? People on the sidewalk slowed to watch, tension rippling in the summer air. Tasha drew a steadying breath. Have a good day, officer. She kept her voice measured, polite, not wanting to give him an excuse. Monroe's nostrils flared. His eyes flicked to the pastry boxes. Got a license for selling those on the street? He jeered. I'm not selling them, she replied calmly. They're for a charity fundraiser. He chuckled cruelly. Sure they are. As she turned to walk away, he spat out another hateful remark that made heads turn. Next time, don't give me a reason to put you in cuffs. You might not like how it feels. Tasha's jaw tightened, but she kept walking. She refused to let him see her shaken. At the same time, a small crowd that had witnessed the interaction stood whispering among themselves. A couple of bystanders discreetly recorded the encounter on their phones. The community's frustration was brewing. A block away, hidden by the swirl of pedestrians, Agent Ridley watched from the driver's seat of his SUV. He witnessed Monroe's confrontation with Tasha, every vicious word that left the officer's mouth. Ridley's jaw tensed. Monroe's arrogance was the missing puzzle piece that would inevitably lead to his downfall. Ridley was patient, methodical, and professional. He already had the wiretaps, the suspicious bank deposits, and even a few insider testimonies. All that remained was the final proof tying Monroe to the narcotics ring in a way that no defense attorney could spin away. On a humid Friday evening, the city lights glittered against a sky that had turned a dusky purple. Officer Monroe was off duty, but he had a meeting, one he dreaded but couldn't avoid. He drove his personal car, a battered sedan, to a parking garage near the waterfront. The Delaware River glistened in the distance under soft moonlight. Monroe checked his phone, scanning for instructions from his contact within the ring. Sure enough, a text message. Level 3, corner slot, black SUV. He pulled in, the echo of tires reverberating off the concrete walls. On level 3, he spotted the black SUV. He parked beside it, his heart hammering. Every time he met these guys, he was reminded of the precarious line he straddled. A tinted window rolled down. A voice emerged from the darkness. "You're late, Monroe." Monroe recognized the voice of Troy Harrison, a local enforcer for the drug syndicate. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick neck and tattoos climbing from his collar onto his scalp. Harrison's cold eyes pinned Monroe in place. "I got here as soon as I could," Monroe mumbled, stepping out of his car. His palms were sweaty. "What's up?" Harrison tossed a thick envelope onto the SUV's hood. "Your payment. We need you to pass along any info about new PD or DEA movements in North Philly. Heard a rumor that the feds are sniffing around for bigger fish." Monroe swallowed. "I'll do what I can, but it's risky." Harrison's lips curled into a contemptuous grin. "You like paying your mama's bills, right? Then it's not that risky." Monroe snatched the envelope. The hush money weighed like a lead ball in his hand. "Got it. Let me know if there's anything specific you need." Harrison gave a brief nod. "Watch your back, cop. If you go down, you better not take us with you." Monroe felt a chill creep down his spine. He offered a tight nod and hurried back to his car. As he started the ignition, he noticed another vehicle rounding the corner, dark, inconspicuous, and possibly watching. Fear churned in his stomach. The entire meetup took less than 5 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Little did Monroe know, 2 floors above, perched behind tinted glass, Agent Ridley had just recorded everything with a high-zoom camera lens. Ridley had arrived half an hour early, hiding in a nondescript sedan while waiting for the rendezvous. He captured the license plates, the envelope exchange, enough to secure a search warrant if needed. The clarity of Monroe's face was unmistakable. Ridley quietly exhaled. This was the break they needed. The following Monday, Tasha visited City Hall for a meeting with a local council representative, Ms. Eliana Rivera, about her complaint. Tasha wasn't naive about the bureaucracy, but she believed shining a light on the problem had value. She stepped through the towering columns of the historic building, her footsteps echoing on the marbled floors. The meeting room smelled of old paper and fresh coffee. Miss Rivera, a middle-aged Latina woman with a reputation for championing civil rights issues, shook Tasha's hand warmly. "Thank you for coming," Ms. Rivera said, guiding Tasha to a chair. "We received your complaint. I'm trying to push for a thorough investigation, but you know how the wheels can turn slowly around here." Tasha nodded. "I appreciate any help, Miss Rivera. People are tired of being intimidated. Officer Monroe's racist remarks aren't just about me. They're part of a broader issue." Mrs. Rivera leaned forward, her eyes reflecting empathy. "You're not the first person to file against him, but we have to build enough momentum to force the department to act. I'm also hearing rumors about federal involvement in some corruption cases. We'll see how that unfolds." Relief washed over Tasha. She wasn't alone. "Let's hope. If you need me for any testimonies, I'm ready." Leaving City Hall, Tasha felt a surge of renewed resolve. She had done her part for now. Though uncertain how long it might take, she felt confident that pressure was mounting on Monroe from multiple angles: her complaint, community pushback, and possibly more. What Tasha didn't realize was just how quickly events were escalating behind the scenes. The DEA had spent months compiling evidence of Monroe's misdeeds. Agent Ridley had even more intel now, thanks to the secret recording in the parking garage. The plan was nearly in place, a multi-agency operation to take down not only the narcotics ring, but also any officers on their payroll. 2 weeks later, Tasha's phone buzzed with a text from Janelle. "Janelle, urgent. Another woman targeted by Monroe near the same bus stop where you were harassed. Need you to come over. She's scared to file a report, but might if we support her." Tasha's frustration flared. Monroe was still out there, abusing his position. She knew she had to help. She arranged to meet Janelle and the frightened woman, an elderly lady named Margaret, in a small cafe near 12th Street. Margaret recounted a familiar scenario: Monroe yelling racial slurs, threatening to arrest her over a minor issue. The woman trembled with humiliation as she spoke. Tasha held her hand gently, offering reassurance. "It's not your fault," Tasha said softly. "He's been doing this to others. We need your voice too. If we all come together, they can't ignore it." Margaret nodded, her eyes moist. "I just don't want any trouble. He knows where I live. He threatened to come by if I didn't keep my mouth shut." Tasha's heart clenched. Monroe was growing bolder, nastier. She and Janelle comforted Margaret, promising to help. They agreed to accompany her to file a formal complaint at the precinct. In their minds, they envisioned a wave of evidence so large that even the slow cogs of bureaucracy would have to grind into motion. Meanwhile, Monroe's internal panic had reached new heights. The narcotics ring he was working with demanded more favors. He faced the possibility that Tasha and others might build enough momentum to end his career. Little did Monroe know, the real threat wasn't the departmental complaint. It was the DEA closing in like a silent shark beneath murky waters. That evening, he patrolled the same neighborhood near Temple University, feeling more than ever that everyone was watching him. He saw Tasha once again, stepping out of a convenience store. A flame of anger ignited in his chest. He felt cornered, paranoid. If only she would back down, he thought, but Tasha Brown was not the kind of woman who would ever back down. Across the street, that black SUV sat once more, tinted windows concealing the watchers. Monroe spat on the ground, cursing his luck. Something big was brewing. He could sense it, and he was right in the crosshairs. The final hammer came down late on a Friday afternoon, a day when people's guards might be lowered, thinking about weekend plans. Monroe was in the middle of writing a traffic citation on a quiet block when his radio crackled. "All available units, request immediate response, 223 North Redwood Street, possible 1066. The dispatcher's voice sounded tense. Monroe recognized the code for a suspicious person possibly armed. Normally he might ignore such a call if it wasn't on his assigned beat, but Redwood Street was just a couple blocks away. He hopped into his cruiser, anxious to do something that might prove his value as a police officer. If he nabbed a suspect, Maybe it would overshadow the mounting complaints. He arrived to find an abandoned old warehouse, its broken windows boarded up, the exterior plastered with torn posters. The door stood ajar. A single squad car was parked out front, but no sign of other officers. Monroe called in his location, stepping carefully into the dim interior. The place smelled of rot and old metal. Dust motes swirled in the beams of late afternoon sunlight. Then he heard footsteps. He whipped around, hand on his holster. A figure emerged from behind a stack of crates, a tall man wearing a black windbreaker. On the front, in big yellow letters, were the initials DEA. "Officer Jack Monroe," the man said in a firm, calm voice, raising a badge. Monroe's stomach dropped. He glanced around, noticing several more men and women stepping into view, each wearing the same windbreaker. This wasn't a suspicious person call. This was a federal sting. "This is a warrant for your arrest," the agent continued, his voice echoing in the hollow space. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to distribute a controlled substance, accepting bribes, and aiding and abetting a criminal organization. Federal charges." Monroe's hand shook on his gun. He contemplated drawing it for a second, but the moment he thought about it, he realized half a dozen agents were already aiming at him. He was outgunned, outmaneuvered, out of options. "Put your hands in the air," came another voice. "Now." Defeated, Monroe complied. He felt them grab his wrists, snapping cold metal cuffs around them. The pinch against his skin was as jarring as a lightning strike. Everything happened so fast. The facade he had built for years, his bravado, his intimidation tactics, his power plays, was crumbling before his very eyes. They patted him down, removing his service weapon, radio and phone. His badge and nameplate glinted under the flickering overhead light. The city he had tormented, the department he had exploited, and the bribes he had taken all converged in this single moment. His mind scrambled, searching for something to say, some defense, but the DEA agents looked at him with cold detachment. Their job was to enforce federal law, and they had the evidence to bury him. Outside the warehouse, as Monroe was led in cuffs toward an unmarked federal vehicle, the sun was setting in a blazing orange sky, like the final chapter of a book he never thought would close. A small crowd had gathered behind police tape. Among them, Tasha stood with her phone in hand, capturing the scene on video. She had just happened to be on her way to a nearby community event when commotion drew her attention. She recognized Monroe's face instantly. The cosmic irony was nearly overwhelming. The officer who had mocked her repeatedly, who had threatened and belittled so many, was now powerless, forcibly shuffled into the back seat of a federal SUV. Tasha's chest fluttered, not with vengeance, but with relief. At that moment, she wasn't sure if her complaint had any direct impact on the timing of this arrest, but she felt validated. Good had finally caught up with evil. Monroe's eyes swept across the crowd and locked onto Tasha. The hatred and regret roiled in his gaze, but all Tasha felt was an overwhelming sense of closure. She lowered her phone as the SUV's doors slammed shut, the crowd murmuring in amazement. Sirens wailed in the distance as more law enforcement vehicles arrived. The stifling summer heat remained, but something felt lighter in the air, like a heavy burden had been lifted from the city's chest. Word of Monroe's arrest rippled through Philadelphia like a shockwave. Local news stations flashed headlines, "Corrupt officer taken down by DEA." The Philadelphia Inquirer ran an article highlighting that the DEA and the U.S. Attorney's Office had uncovered a web of corruption linking police officers to a large-scale drug operation. Monroe was only one of several arrests made that day, but his name became a centerpiece, especially once multiple residents came forward with stories of his racist harassment. Within hours, the police department issued a statement condemning his actions. Internal Affairs released a briefing that there had been numerous complaints, some of which were under review. The department promised a thorough house cleaning, though skepticism remained high among the public. Still, the fact that an officer had been publicly arrested gave many residents a renewed sense of hope that no one was beyond accountability. Tasha found herself fielding calls from local community leaders and journalists. She gave a measured statement, emphasizing the need for systematic reforms to prevent officers like Monroe from operating unchecked. She also spoke privately to Margaret and others who had suffered under Monroe's abusive behavior, encouraging them to speak their truth if investigators asked for testimony. Sitting in her apartment one evening, Tasha sipped tea and re-watched the clip she had recorded of Monroe's arrest, both to confirm the events were real and to solidify her sense of closure. She knew the road ahead was still long. Countless officers like Monroe existed across the country, but for once it felt like justice had been served in her corner of the world. Across town, in a cramped holding cell at a federal detention facility, Monroe awaited his first hearing. The noise of metal doors slamming, voices echoing down the halls, formed his new soundtrack. He sat on a thin cot, head in his hands, the stale odor of disinfectant and sweat filling his nostrils. Federal agents had enumerated the charges: wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to distribute narcotics. The weight of possible decades in prison loomed over him. His mind replayed countless interactions: the bribes, the hush money, the deals with criminals, and the way he mocked innocent people to mask his own fears and insecurities. In his darkest hour, Monroe thought of his ailing mother. How would she cope without him covering her bills? He thought of the short thrill he got from easy money, weighed against the humiliation of being locked up like a criminal himself. Regret stabbed at him like an icy blade. In the end, he alone bore responsibility for choosing this path. The community watched as Monroe's trial proceeded. The prosecution's evidence was damning: bank records, recorded conversations, testimonies from multiple ring members, and even the hidden camera footage from the parking garage. In addition, numerous complaints about his racial harassment were cited to emphasize his disregard for both the law and civil rights. It wasn't long before Monroe's defense began to crumble under the weight of undeniable facts. When the guilty verdict finally came, it rang out in the courtroom with the gravity of a gavel striking an anvil. Tasha, who attended part of the trial, sat quietly in the gallery, watching Monroe's reaction. For a moment, she almost felt pity at the despair etched on his face. He hung his head, shoulders slumped, no longer the arrogant man who had mocked her on the sidewalk. The realization that he had lost everything, his badge, his freedom, his reputation, seemed to crush him from the inside. Outside, reporters buzzed around, hungry for statements. Tasha offered a short remark: "This is a step toward accountability, but the fight continues. We have to stay vigilant to ensure all officers uphold the law equally." She refused to let the narrative become solely about Monroe, pushing instead for deeper reforms and support for the communities harmed by such corruption. The city council took up proposals for independent review boards and stricter oversight. There were heated debates, powerful speeches, and new alliances formed between activists, city officials, and honest officers determined to rebuild trust. No single event could fix systemic issues overnight, but Monroe's arrest served as a catalyst that many hoped would spark lasting change. In the weeks and months after the verdict, Tasha went about her life with renewed energy, expanding her outreach program and continuing to mentor youth. She also advocated for police community dialogues, facilitating workshops where residents and officers could talk face-to-face, share experiences, and promote empathy. Some officers came reluctantly, but a few admitted they found the effort refreshing, an opportunity to break down barriers and rebuild trust from the ground up. Margaret, once so terrified to file a complaint, found solace in a group of neighbors who banded together, discussing ways to report police misconduct safely. She even volunteered at a local senior center, sharing her story to encourage others to speak up about injustice. As for Monroe, he became a cautionary tale whispered among officers at the precinct. Some said he got what was coming to him. Others pointed to the tragedy of a man who let desperation and moral weakness pave a road to ruin. His name lingered like a bad memory, an unwelcome ghost, reminding everyone that the system was fallible. The real triumph belonged to the community that refused to be silenced. Tasha's complaint, combined with growing frustration from other residents, intersected perfectly with the DEA's bigger investigation. Sometimes justice needs a chorus of voices and the unwavering determination of people who refuse to be intimidated by bullies. And so, the chapter on Officer Monroe closes, locked away behind cold bars where his cruelty and corruption can no longer harm those he once tormented. Through the courageous stand of people like Tasha Brown and the relentless pursuit of truth by federal agents, the city caught a glimpse of genuine change. It reminds us that no matter how deeply rooted racism and injustice might be, they cannot stand forever against the collective will of a community determined to hold wrongdoers accountable. If you believe in uplifting these stories of justice, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. By doing so, you play an active role in spreading awareness and inspiring others to raise their voices against oppression. Together, let's continue shining a light on tales that prove truth will ultimately prevail, and that karma, when it strikes, can be swift and certain,